Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 21st of January of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the Sudzha direction where the Russians continue their offensive operation. The situation is very critical in this area, and that was also confirmed by the President of Ukraine Zelensky. He stated that there are more than 60,000 Russian soldiers in the Kursk direction, as well as 12,000 North Koreans, of whom 4,000 have already died. That was stated by Zelensky. He also stated that I am very grateful to the armed forces of Ukraine for being in the Kursk direction. The President of Ukraine also noted that the Russian armed forces wanted to capture Kharkiv. So these are the statements of Zelensky, but when talking about the situation on the ground, indeed the situation is very difficult. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians tried to attack the settlement, the Malaya agglomeration. The Russians were attacking from the western direction, and as I understand and according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to answer two settlements of the Malaya agglomeration. The Russians entered the village of Nikoilsky from the south, and the Russians entered the village of Viktorovka from the west. We made these conclusions based on the videos that were published by the Ukrainian side by the 47th Mechanized Brigade. For example, in this video we can see how the Ukrainians were attacking and FPV droning the armored vehicles of the Russian Federation in the vicinity of the settlement of Nikoilsk. Most likely the Russians were trying to evacuate abandoned and damaged vehicle, but those vehicles were damaged and destroyed once again with Ukrainian FPV drones. A little bit further in the southern direction, we have another video published by the 47th Mechanized Brigade, and in this video we can see the moments of how the Russians were attacking the settlement of Nikoilsk from the south. The Russians, as usually, were using a lot of vehicles, tanks, infantry, fighting vehicles, soldiers, a lot of equipment. A lot of equipment was damaged and destroyed, but despite the huge losses, the Russians managed to answer the settlement itself. Based on the videos and geolocations that were provided us by pro-Ukrainian sources, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. Most likely there are very heavy clashes on the territory of Malaya Loknya. There are very heavy clashes on the territory of Nikoilsk. We don't know for sure where exactly the Russians were stopped. As for now, we have adjusted the map just according to the age geolocations in this area. Yes, indeed, the Russians attacked. We don't know for sure whether they managed to dig in deeper. Now let's discuss the situation a little bit further in the southern direction, and right before we start making the video, pro-Russian sources published the video of how they were raising the Russian flag on the territory of the settlement of Nikolaeva-Darina. So tomorrow or by the next update we will try to geolocate the place where the Russians raised the flag, but most likely the entire settlement was captured and secured by the Russians, and now the Russians have a very powerful and strong foothold on the Ukrainian side of the river of Snagas, and now everything ready to move further in the western directions toward the settlement of Sverdlikova, or in the southern directions toward the settlement of Yunakivka. Furthermore, we have lots of very interesting updates from the eastern part of the Sudzha direction. During the previous several days, the Ukrainians carried out several counterattacks in this area with the purpose to force the Russians to fall back. I'll remind you that in the early January, the Russians attacked the settlement of Ivanovka, and several sources reported that as a result of those attacks, the Russians managed to establish complete control over this village, but those were just speculations and wishful thinkings. As for now, we have just one video from the eastern part of Ivanovka. In this video we can see how the Russian drone, FPV drone, fiber optic drone, was flying above the village trying to get the Ukrainian soldiers in this area. Based in this video we have adjusted the map in Ukraine favor. This territory used to be considered as a contested area in Ukraine favor. Now we have complete control by the armed forces of Ukraine. Also, the Ukrainians carried out several counterattacks on the line between Bondaryovka and Agranom. This village was also colored in Russian favor in the end of December of 2024. Now we have proofs that the Ukrainians, most likely as a result of counterattacks, managed to restore control over this territory. We see that from one side the Ukrainians are trying to slow the Russians down in the northern direction, but on the other side the Ukrainians are trying to improve their positions around the settlement of Sudzha and to hold their lines as long as possible. The Russians most likely realized that they are not ready to attack the settlement of Sudzha from the south and from the southeast, so that's why the Russians decided to continue advancing to the west of the settlement of Plyokhova by attacking the village by the name of Guyeva. Different sources reported that during the previous 24 hours the Russians managed to improve their position significantly on the Ukrainian side of the river of Psol. Furthermore, we have a video. Let's take a look at this video. In this video we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking the settlement of Guyeva with multiple launch rocket systems. This video confirms that the Russians at least made something like artillery preparation before further offensive operation, but we don't know for sure whether the next offensive operation took place or not. Anyway, there are very heavy clashes between the Russian army and the Ukrainian armed forces. Currently there are very heavy clashes mainly for the initiative. Zelensky sends more and more forces in this area with the purpose to stabilize the situation until something happens. Nobody knows for sure what exactly Zelensky is waiting for, but something is going to happen. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the northern Kupiansk direction, where according to information we have during the previous 24 hours the Russians managed to improve their position significantly and to take under complete control the southern part of the settlement of Dvorichna. The Ukrainians controlled just 15-20% in the northwestern part, and most likely during the next several days the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back further in the northwestern direction towards different huge forests in this area. The Russians most likely from these positions are going to attack further in the northeastern and northwestern direction with the purpose to attack the armored forces of Ukraine in the Volchansk direction from behind. Of course, this operation is not going to take place tomorrow, the day after. The distance is too huge, but the Russians can start now, and in several months they will be able to defeat the Ukrainians completely. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the northern Kupiansk direction. According to information we have, the Ukrainians during the previous several days managed to restore logistics by establishing additional pontoon bridges in this area. The Russians managed to discover them and to destroy them. Now let's discuss the situation in the central Kupiansk direction. Today, during the previous 24 hours, several Russian sources reported that as a result of clashes, the village of Zelonofka was captured by the Russians completely. We are waiting for geolocations and for Ministry of Defense report to adjust the map, but obviously if this information is correct, the situation is getting worse and worse for the Ukrainians. As for the Liman direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received almost anything, just several updates from the settlement of Kolodezi. In this video we can see another attempt of the armored forces of Ukraine to counterattack the lost positions in the vicinity of Ivanovka. The Russians managed to discover the movements of Ukrainian vehicles, and when they were in the range of attack of Russian FPV drones, these vehicles were damaged and destroyed. Based on this video, we're not adjusting anything. This video confirms that third or fourth day in a row we see very heavy clashes in the area of this dense network of the fortifications. As for the Sivers direction, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything, just the regular activities. Now we are moving to the most important area, to the city of Chasiv Yar, where the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their position significantly. I'll remind you that just yesterday several sources reported that the Russians managed to establish complete control over the northern part of the city of Chasiv Yar. Now the Russians are trying to dig in deeper and to repel upcoming Ukrainian attacks. Due to the fact that the Russians secured the most northern part of the city of Chasiv Yar, they managed to release significant number of forces that were redeployed in the southern direction, and now the Russians are trying to defeat the Ukrainians in the vicinity of the micro district by the name of Novy. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly in this area and to take under control the most important stronghold in this area. The former children camp Ognioporets was captured by the Russians as a result of very heavy clashes. Once again, based on this video, we have adjusted the map. This is the map, for example, by the end of the 20th of January, and this is the map by the end of the 21st of January. Now let's move further. As for the Torsk direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything. We were expecting that the Russians will take under complete control the city of Torsk before the Trump's inauguration, but we see that the Russians haven't managed to complete this task. Most likely there are very heavy clashes, and most likely within the next week or two the Russians will finish the battle for the city, but as for now, nothing to talk about. Now we're moving in the direction of Toretsk. Today we got lots of very interesting updates. And the most important is coming from the southern Toretsk direction, Pokrovsk direction. In this video that was published by the Ukrainian side, we can see a number of FPV drone attacks on the Russian positions, Russian vehicles in the northern part of the village of Zelonofka. In this video, in the final episode of this video, we can see a standalone building that was attacked by the Ukrainian FPV drone. This is exactly the building that was attacked by the Ukrainian FPV drone, Ukrainian forces, and based on this video we have changed the map in Russian favor. This territory used to be considered as a contested area. Now we have no doubts that the Russians managed to secure the village completely. Now the Russians will most likely try to attack the company stronghold that located to the north of the village of Zelone. Furthermore, during the next days the Russians will concentrate their focus on the village of Lysovka. So these territories is the primary target for the armored force of Russian Federation for the next 2 or 3 weeks. If this territory falls and comes in Russian hands, then the Russians will be able to begin advancing in the direction of the city of Pokrovsk. As for the city of Pokrovsk, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine in the southern citadel. Today the Ukrainian sources published the video of consequences of another Russian attack. Most likely the building was set on fire as a result of another, I don't know, missile strike, or as a result of fab attack or something like this. As for now, Pokrovsk wasn't damaged much, but obviously during the next several months the southern part of the city would be reduced to ruins. As for the Dnipro direction, during the previous 24 hours we got just one important update from the southern part of the settlement of Kotlina. According to information we have, the Ukrainians carried out several counterattacks along the TO406 road in the direction of the southern part of the settlement. For these purposes, the Ukrainians were using the separate storm assault battalion Skala number 425. In this video we can see how the Ukrainians were trying to restore control over the southern part of the settlement. As you can see in this moment, we can see how the Ukrainians were demining the roads. Then we can see lots of vehicles that were heading towards the settlement. In this episode we can see how the Ukrainians brought their tank as close as possible to the village itself, and how the Ukrainians began bombing and attacking the H positions of the armored force of Russian Federation. And then we can see how the Ukrainians landed their soldiers in the most northeastern part of the settlement, and they began clearing the building that the Russians were using as a temporary deployment point. Based on this video we're not adjusting anything, because later we got reports that all these attacks were repelled by the Russians. But anyway, it's very interesting video, and it's better to wait for additional updates, because maybe the Ukrainians managed to restore. But telling the truth, I'm not sure that the main purpose of the Ukrainians was to restore control over Kotlina. I believe that the main purpose was to slow down the Russians and not to allow the armored force of Russian Federation to finish the battle for the village of Kotlina itself. As for the settlement of Udachne, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything. Now let's move further. Let's discuss the situation around Andreevka fortified area. As you can see from this area we continue receiving the biggest number of icons for another 24 hours. The Russians managed to improve their positions in the western direction from the settlement of Petropavlovka. Slowly, very slowly, but step by step, the Russians continue advancing in the western direction with the purpose to outflank Andreevka fortified area from the north, from the northwest. And today the Ukrainians published another video of how they were trying to slow down the Russians with FPV drones, and based on this video we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. The dynamic in this area is very big. So for example, this is the situation by the end of the 19th of January of 2025, and this is the situation by the end of the 21st of January of 2025. The Russians are getting closer and closer. Furthermore, we got very important video from the eastern part of Andreevka. In this video we can see how the Russians were FPV droning the abandoned Ukraine vehicle in this dense network of the fortifications. And the thing is that several weeks ago pro-Russian sources reported that this stronghold was captured by the Russians, and now we have video that confirms completely opposite situation. So this is the situation by the end of the 20th of January. We colored this area as a contested area, but we kept the controlled territory by the armed forces of Ukraine based on the report from the Russian side, and today we have adjusted map back in Ukrainian favor. The stronghold is under complete Ukrainian control. The Russians established complete FPV drone control over the Andreevka fortified area during the previous 24 hours. We got lots of icons and lots of geolocations of how the Russians were FPV droning the Ukraine abandoned vehicles, damaged vehicles above the Andreevka fortified area. Lots of losses, as you can see. Lots of equipment and vehicles were destroyed, and the Ukrainians are suffering losses. This is the only conclusion we can make about this. As for the Kurachovo-Poky, during the previous 24 hours, nothing special happened. As for the Velika Newasolova direction, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions just a little bit in the central part, in the south, in the eastern and the southeastern part of the settlement. As you can see, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians control just around 10% of Velika Newasolovka. Another 50% or 55% are located in the contested area or inside of the gray zone, and the Ukrainians control just 35%, maybe even less, of the settlement of Velika Newasolovka. The situation here is very critical, but the Russians began the major offensive operation several days ago, and we see that around 2, 3, 4 days of clashes have already passed, and we see that Ukrainians still hold their positions, which is very important in this situation. Now we are moving in the Zaporizhzhia direction. During the previous 24 hours, the Russian sources published several videos of how they were bombing and attacking the edge positions of the armored forces of Ukraine, and based on this video we just adjusted the map in Ukrainian favor, just small corrections on map. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.